Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Stakeholder Whispering Live, where I bring on a guest to talk about stakeholder whispering, stakeholder engagement, whatever word you want to use for it. I wrote a book called Stakeholder Whispering, but the basic idea is that we all work for somebody, right? Whether they're our boss, our client, our investor, the media, whoever is sort of asking us to do things or watching the things that we're doing, have an interest in the things that we're doing. Most of the time, they don't really know what they need. And so we have to help them figure it out. And then we can actually do that maybe rather than what they asked us to do, or at least, what they asked us to do may need to be tweaked, right? And so that's the basic idea of the book. And we're having these weekly sessions to talk to people out in the world about their experiences doing exactly that. So this week, I'm very happy to have John Gobron join me. He is a founder, an innovator, an educator, has had a very long career in sales and has been a leader for a very long time as well. And so, John, thank you for being here. And why don't you do a little more complete job introducing yourself to everybody?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. And thank you. Thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun. It's been awesome following your journey about the book. I know when you kind of pre-released it in the winter, and then I was excited to get a copy and read it, and also to revisit it to prepare for this today. So let's see. By way of introduction, as you said, most of my career has been in the sales and kind of customer facing roles, from being an outside sales rep to being a sales manager to being a GM, and then being in a CEO role for the past two companies. And in all of those experiences, from cold calling and door knocking and selling beepers to raising venture capital money, the concept of stakeholder whisper really resonated with me, and really across the spectrum of what you might be needing to do to communicate an idea you have or something that you want, and get it in line with something someone else wants. And I think ultimately, whether you're in there's that saying, you're always in sales, whether you're, an accountant who you might think is the furthest person from sales or something like that to a salesperson. But the people who are successful accountants or whatever else are good at communicating their ideas and collaborating and doing a lot of the things that you think sometimes are just in the sales domain. So I love the idea of whispering as well, like, the opposite of that, negative prototype of like a 1970s used car salesman who's like yelling at you to buy the car, or all these negative things that can be attributed to sales. And you very rarely think of a good salesperson in particular as a whisperer. But it really, the concept is so sound, and it really resonates as to that's a better way to get your message across, and you're collaborating and you're speaking quietly, and just the whole concept of it is I think pretty powerful. So I can't say that I've done that in all my career, but it's fun when you look back and say, where are the times that whispering either worked or could have worked had I thought about trying it or took advantage of it. So so that's as I said, it's fun to be here. So thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm really glad you're here. And I got to say, so you just said something very important, which is, no matter what you do, you're in sales. And the other thing I always say is, no matter what you do, you're in project management. Because that's another thing. Like a lot of organizations in certain departments in different organizations, they have actual project managers, right? Someone whose job is to manage a project. But we all have to be project managers. Just like I agree, we all have to be in sales. So I think it's a great point. So that was a perfect segue, right? Like, you've had these things that have happened in the past where, gee, I wish I had whispered, or times where you did and it worked out well. So that's what we're here to talk about, successes and failure. So I know you brought a couple stories with you. So I let you pick success or failure. Where would you like to get us started?
I guess I'll start on the failure side. And this one in particular is one that resonated for me. And like a lot of things, it ended up having a really good effect, not in the short term, but in the long term. And it was a deal. It was a software company I was at many years ago, and I was in a direct sales role, and I was doing quite well at it. And I had this customer in Pennsylvania who really liked what we were doing. He and I had developed a really good rapport. And I kind of fell into some of the common traps that, a salesperson does. I had a really good relationship with this guy, and I kind of was okay with single threading the relationship. And I made some efforts to expand it. And he kind of skillfully, said, work just with me. And I got all the juice and I can get this done. And he wasn't a VP, he was a director level person. So he should have, he was near the rooms where this stuff happened. But anyway, it was a really big deal. And I should have known better to work with just one guy. But anyway, he said, this is ready to go. And this was a multi-million-dollar project. And I brought the CEO of our company down to help close the deal, which this guy loved doing. And he was like, an MIT grad. He was a software genius. He was one of the 5 smartest people I've probably ever met. But he didn't really love ambiguity. So when we got there, and we met with the CIO of the whole system, and the 4 of us were in the room, and I started, talking with my champion at the time and collaborating on how we're going to bring this to fruition. And she said, I got to stop right here. This is my first meeting here. I don't, we are not ready to do this. Oh, and this is a multi-year project. And I don't know, what you were thinking. And she was talking to me, but I know she was also talking to her director, and it ended pretty quickly. And my CEO was so angry. We flew down there. It was a day trip to Philly from Boston. And, in the flight back, I happened to be reading Moneyball at the time. The book had come out, the Michael Lewis book, but the movie hadn't. So, I grew up playing baseball. I love statistics. So it was really a book that I had loved. And I was like trying to console myself I finally got separated by the guy in the plane. And I was reading it and I'm like, oh my goodness, like a lot of the things that Billy Beane went through as a baseball player getting to the pros, I just went through in a microcosm. I've done a lot of good things up until that point in this role. And then the curveball came and I didn't hit it. And how did I not see that coming? And why can't I hit a curveball? And I started thinking about ways to look at it. And I went back and really, this really, really bothered me, as you can imagine. So I looked at all of my deals that I'd done over the past couple of years, and I also had the ability to look at all the other sales reps deals, and it was like a sample of like 80 deals that we had won or lost. And I started looking at what went into that. Like, did emails matter? How many emails went in? I surveyed the other salespeople that were quite helpful. How many phone calls did you make? How many on-sites did you make? What kind of electronic health record did they have? All the things that could be measured. And we ended up with like 43 variables. So I had this really good database. 80 wins and losses, 43 variables. I started doing a regression analysis and, things started looking really positive, like this is meaningful. And then I reached my level of where I could, what I remembered from graduate school. So I called up, I went to Babson and I called up the stat professor I had and said, hey, I'm onto something here. Can you help? And, we had this great conversation. We met for coffee and he was like, this is great because I have an advanced statistics class where we're doing a class project and, groups of 2 or 3. And he goes, the greatest thing is this is real world data. Usually we're looking at, beer sales from 1980 and how do we analyze it or whatever the students want to pick, but it's always old data. It's very often not relevant because it's hard to get data on stuff like this. So we ended up getting these 3 guys that were just geniuses, and they ended up doing this fantastic analysis for me. And it came out to be that, and it really worked back into what I had done wrong at this particular deal in Philadelphia, that of all of our data, really most of it didn't matter. It didn't matter what executives you brought in on our side. It didn't matter how many phone calls you made or how many emails you did or some of the, where they were located or the size of the facility, things like that. What did matter is, did we do a pilot with them, which was a binary yes or no. It mattered the level of competition, which was a highly subjective, I asked the salespeople, how competitive was this deal, 1 through 5? And how many people were you working with that were supporters of the project? So we asked how many people we were working with in total and how many people we were working with that were supporters of the project. And with those 3 variables alone, we were able to build a model that had I think it was a 74% accuracy rate on whether retrospectively we were going to win a deal or lose a deal. It was phenomenal. Yeah. Like, okay, now I have this formula. I have these 3 variables that I can start measuring and managing to, and shared it with the leadership team, and everyone got pretty excited. And I ended up presenting it to the board of directors. But before I did that, I brought it back to the Babson guys, and they're like, well, if we're going to do this to the board of directors, because I asked them to come in and actually do the presentation, they're like, we got to do everything. We got to scrub your data. And in doing so, they threw out the pilot because they said it was kind of self-selecting. It didn't really meet their stringent statistical analysis. And also they threw out the competition because it was so subjective. It was almost like linear. Like when they made it not competitive, we always won, and when it was competitive, we always lost. So it really wasn't right. But the supporters alone had this super high correlation to winning or losing a deal. And I was thinking of you, and I was preparing for this because they made me this great. You could probably do a lot better with the data visualization, but they made me this S curve that said when you have one supporter in your deal, then you have a 25% chance of winning. And when you have two, it went up to like 35, and at 3, it was like 50. It kind of flattened out in the middle. And then at 4 to 5, it shot up to like 85%, and then it flattened out again. So the graph showed that if you could get 5 people on your side, you had this incredibly high chance of winning a deal. Wow. And you didn't need more than 5 because 5 to 10 was still a flat line. So you didn't really have to, couldn't hurt. You didn't have to do that. But in my deal with one guy on my side, I could have made that trip. If I made that trip 4 times, I would have closed one of them. But that wasn't the odds I was looking for, especially to fly the CEO down and to forecast it all the way up to the board, and really irresponsible things if I look back at retrospectively, especially in a year that the other deals were going well. It was a great lesson learned on how to do it. And we ended up then taking it and making an algorithm out of it and saying what roles mattered. So
I was going to say, because like you could have 5 of the most junior employees, and is that going to still make the difference? Or here you had the CIO who was like, "We're not doing this deal." If you'd had 2 but included that person, like there must be some nuance there.
Yeah, we did exactly that. So the board of directors people and the VP of sales at the time were like, we need a little bit more. Like this was at a time in healthcare where the role of the chief medical information officer was emerging. And now it's pretty much a standard everywhere, but not all hospitals had them when this was happening. So we back to the statistics, guys. We built an algorithm out of it by kind of playing around with if we gave certain roles, certain percentages, how does it work? And it actually kind of worked out cleanly that we attributed a 35% weighting to the CMIO, that really important person, a 25% weighting to a CIO or other executive, and a 15% weighting to everybody else. So it really helped us to narrow in on, hey, this CMIO role is more important than we realized kind of without the data. But with the data, we ended up hiring a doctor, and it really changed the trajectory of the company on how we went to market. And how we sold and how we even forecast, because it really became the standard of saying, if you as a sales rep working with the leadership team and, all the other people who have to collaborate, who you have to whisper to, for me to bring a product person, it empowered them to say, John, how many supporters do you have? Because I'm not flying to New Mexico to do this presentation with you if you only have 2 people on your side, because it's not a good use of my time. So it really ended up becoming a language that we used around it, and we became very, very successful. We had it was a lot of other positive things that went on in the company, but that really helped our sales from that moment. And I'm not sure if I ever would have done that, particularly that regression analysis, if we hadn't lost that deal. So although it was a big deal, and I really regretted losing it. In the big picture, it was a good thing to happen. On a lot of levels. And I've carried that magic number of 5. I've carried that into every complex sales environment I've ever done up until this day. If you talk in the book about a whisperer by proxy, and in my industry in healthcare, you're very rarely, if ever. I've been in one room where a decision happened. But as the vendor, you do your best job and all the things that are important, and get your champions and kind of like, blocking and tackling of sales, but you're never in the room when they make the decision.
That's the truth.
You need to arm them, and you need to give them the tools and everything like that, and language and all the important things. But you are effectively whispering by proxy when that decision happens in the moment. Now, it may have already happened, and make sure that when the engagement happens, you already know the result, but you can't always do that. So it was a pretty, it's a pretty powerful way to think about, if I have 5 supporters as a rule in my complex deal, I'm probably going to win. And if I have 1, I'm probably not going to win. And if you're in the middle, then there's a lot of other things to go. And it's not black and white, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, it's probabilities.
It's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, whispering by proxy doesn't work because you have that one person. You have to hope they're going to remember all your arguments, that they have the confidence to really push for you, that they're all the things that can go wrong with one person. But with 5 people, like all of a sudden, well, this person will remember the details. This person is going to push hard. This person is going to whatever. This person has the best relationship with the CMIO. And that combined, now you have the opportunity where that whispering by proxy might work.
Exactly right. And it made me think, so a couple other things that I've developed or co-developed with some really smart mentors that help with that. So one of them is, and actually another story I thought about where whispering went really well, where we developed this letter where this guy was the CIO. He did have the go juice. He did have to go to the board of directors, but his team reported up to him. He really liked what we did. So the mission there was to get his team to understand what we do and to also support, but to give him, to arm him to go to that board meeting and say, I need X, a lot of money to buy this thing that I really want. And we created this letter that I often call, like in your book, you talk about, the being a reporter and studying journalism and everything like that. We've often called this a reporting letter where in the customer's words, you try to get, what's going on, the current situation. And then what do you want to have happen? We headline it like desired results. And that's usually one conversation. Sometimes it's a couple. But then the meat of it comes, and what's the impact? So you go from A to B, you're happy about B. What's the impact? What's the impact to you? What's the impact to your stakeholders, your patients, your board, your CFO, whatever is important to you? In that, the more numerical or financial you can make it, the more powerful it is. But also, what's your criteria? If you're deciding this, we often say, whether you go with us or anybody else, what's your criteria for selecting, this thing? And then what's your process? And to me, that's always the single most important one. Because if a person doesn't know the process, they're never going to buy you or anybody else.
Sure.
And then,
or it's going to be random if they do.
Yeah, exactly right. We talk about timeline and budget and next steps. But anyway, created this letter, and over a period of a couple of months, really worked with the CIO to say, did I accurately capture what's going on here? And I still remember the phone call. He's like, John, this is awesome. Would you mind if I put my name at the bottom of it and I shared it with the board of directors? And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's okay. And you mentioned it in the book about when you're successful. I would love reading this part. It was like, when they adopt your language, you're successful.
Yeah.
And of course, he used it. He went into the board of directors. They loved it, and said, "What a great job you've done analyzing this whole situation. You've made our decision easy to do." And it really wasn't about. I'm pretty sure our company wasn't mentioned in it. I tried really hard to make sure that you write it in the voice, or one writes it in the voice of the customer, not so common as a salesperson or rep or executive or leader to do the chest beating and talk about yourself. We're so great because of this. And the customer doesn't really care about that. I mean, they do at one level to get you into the process, but really they care about them. How's this going to impact us?
And the moment you mention your company, it's going to be the opposite, right? They're going to be so skeptical of that paper. They're going to be like, "Oh, we're not going to listen to this thing." If it's
totally right. It becomes a commercial. Yeah,
exactly.
As you do a lot of consulting. So when you're consulting, you kind of have that rare, if you do it well, I guess, you have that rare air where you're a valued friend or whisperer, but you're really not, on the dark side, as it were, from some, sleazy salesperson who just wants to put their hand in your pocket.
Yeah.
Which is a tough, that's a real thing that you have to, you look at the different industries, you look at like nursing as like highly respected and highly trusted. And then at the bottom end of that, you have like salespeople.
Right.
So trying to, change that. And I literally look at it from a mindset perspective, and even from a whispering perspective. If you think of, whether you're in sales or consulting or project management, if your mission is to help someone, it really changes your lens on
That's it.
how you communicate and what you communicate and how you receive information back as well. And,
I was talking to somebody yesterday about the book, and
yep.
he asked, I can't remember the question he asked, but I was essentially saying, your job is to solve the organization's problems. Like, you're not there to sell your thing. You're not there to do the tasks you usually do. You're there to help them solve their problems. And if you come at it from that perspective, then everything you do will be oriented towards problem solving rather than, selling your stuff. And in that case, it wasn't really about sales, but same basic idea. Yeah. And, what he said to me was, oh, so you mean you have to care? And that's it. Like, you have to actually care. And if you're in sales, like the typical sleazy salesperson, to your point, like, they don't care. They're just trying to line their pockets. But if you're the salesperson who actually cares about your clients and you're trying to solve their problems, customers, whatever, then that is the difference. And that's the only way whispering can really work.
It's so true. I think of there's this awesome TED Talk. I don't remember the guy's name. He's the founder of Pixar. And his TED Talk is called Make Me Care. And he talks about how he writes scripts and invents characters with the sole mission of making the audience care about them. And it's fascinating to kind of hear about, Finding Nemo and Toy Story and these characters that were created so that you would care about them, and how he did that is fascinating. But it's, not at all dissimilar from, being, trying to help someone, get to a point that they want to get to. And oftentimes it also helps you bail, which is in sales in particular, but in coding and everything like that. Failing fast is the whole manifesto of Agile, but it also is for sales. Like, if you're going to fail in sales, you want to fail before you get on the plane to Philadelphia with your CEO.
With the CEO,
and not fail then. Failing fast in sales is important. There's a balance, because you do want to be, I want to go for it, and I want to do what we can do to win this deal, but you can't win all deals. And knowing what you can win and what you can is really, really important.
Right. Actually, one of the books that I quoted a few times in the book, and I don't know if you have read this other book, but The Challenger Sale is really good for salespeople, particularly. Really interesting book on that topic.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, I think we've covered good ground here. Any final words of advice, like that one nugget that people can take away that says, if you do this, you're going to be successful?
One nugget, I don't know. I think that in sales, it's really about the relationship more than anything. You could have the best product or the worst product, but if you're not able to understand what the person on the other side of the table, or the Zoom, or the whatever is wanting, then it doesn't really matter. And that sounds almost cliche, but it's really, really important, more than anything. So I think that's why the name of your book really resonates, because that, when you are able to whisper to someone, it means they're usually listening, and you have their ear and they have your ear too. So it becomes it's almost like the preface to connecting. When you've done that, then you're doing a good job. You might not always win, but at least you're doing a good job.
Yeah, I like that. You have their ear and they have your ear. It is a two-way street. It is a relationship. Otherwise, it doesn't work. If it's a one-way thing, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you, John. I really appreciate you being here. I haven't had anybody on yet who really was focused so much on sales, and it's a very relevant point of view for this topic. So I really appreciate you sharing your experience.
It was in the book. I read it as a sales book. Like it's my lens, I guess, on something like that. And I have a million of them on my bookshelf. But this was great. I really, I had a lot of really practical things. I love your list of biases. That was awesome. Like things that sometimes but you forget. And you deal with those. So I really enjoyed the book. Thanks for writing it. And I'm really glad to have read it. And this has been fun. So thanks for having me as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And for everybody watching, I'll be back again next week with another guest to talk a little bit more about stakeholder whispering. So we'll see you then. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.